When people talk about plastic pollution, they usually focus on landfills, rivers, or oceans. The atmosphere rarely comes up. It feels disconnected from the problem. Plastic is something solid, something you can see and hold. Air, on the other hand, seems intangible, clean, and constantly moving. But that separation is misleading. Plastic doesn't just stay on the ground or in the water. It interacts with the atmosphere in multiple ways, through production, degradation, and even microscopic transport. And those interactions are beginning to reveal a new dimension of the plastic problem, one that directly affects the air we breathe and the climate we depend on. To understand this, it helps to start at the very beginning of plastic's life cycle: production. Most plastic is made from fossil fuels, primarily oil and natural gas. Extracting and processing these resources release greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide and methane. Then comes manufacturing. Converting raw materials into plastic polymers requires high temperatures and energy-intensive processes, which generate additional emissions. By the time a plastic product is created, it has already contributed to atmospheric pollution, and this is happening at a massive scale. Global plastic production has increased dramatically over the past few decades, and with it, the emissions associated with it. But production is only part of the story. Once plastic enters the environment, it begins to change. Sunlight, particularly ultraviolet radiation, breaks down plastic through a process called photodegradation. This doesn't eliminate the plastic. Instead, it weakens its structure, causing it to fragment into smaller pieces. During this process, plastic can release gases into the atmosphere. Some studies have found that certain types of plastic emit methane and ethylene as they degrade under sunlight. Both of these are greenhouse gases. Methane, in particular, is significantly more effective at trapping heat in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide over short periods of time. This means that plastic waste, especially when exposed to sunlight, can actively contribute to climate change, not just through its production, but through its degradation as well. Then there's the issue of microplastics in the air. As plastic breaks down into smaller particles, some of those particles become light enough to be carried by the wind. These airborne microplastics are now being detected in a wide range of environments, including urban areas, rural regions, and even remote locations far from any obvious source of pollution. They are present in dust, in indoor air, and in outdoor air. Every time synthetic materials are worn down, whether it's clothing shedding fibers, tires wearing against roads, or plastic waste fragmenting, tiny particles are released into the atmosphere. Once airborne, these particles can travel long distances. They can be transported across continents and deposited through rain or simply settle out of the air over time. This means that even areas with relatively low plastic use can still be affected by atmospheric plastic pollution. The presence of microplastics in the air raises important questions about human health. When we breathe, we are not just inhaling gases, we are also inhaling particles suspended in the air. Some of these particles are natural, like dust or pollen. Others are pollutants, such as soot or industrial emissions. Now, microplastics are part of that mix. Research has shown that microplastics can enter the respiratory system. Larger particles might be trapped in the upper airways, but smaller ones can reach deeper into the lungs. The long-term effects of this exposure are still being studied, but there are concerns about inflammation, tissue damage, and the potential for chemical exposure. Plastic particles can carry additives and absorbed pollutants. When inhaled, these substances may interact with lung tissue in ways that are not yet fully understood. While the science is still developing, the presence of plastic in the air is clearly not neutral. Beyond direct human exposure, airborne microplastics may also affect atmospheric processes. Particles in the atmosphere can influence how clouds form and how sunlight is absorbed or reflected. This is already well understood for substances like dust and aerosols. Microplastics, being particles themselves, could potentially play a similar role. Some early research suggests that microplastics may act as cloud condensation nuclei, tiny surfaces on which water droplets can form. If this is the case, they could influence cloud properties and, by extension, weather patterns and climate processes. However, this area of research is still in its early stages and much remains uncertain. What is clear is that plastic is no longer confined to solid waste systems. It has become part of the atmospheric system as well. Another major connection between plastic and the atmosphere is waste management, particularly incineration. In many parts of the world, plastic waste is burned, either in controlled facilities or in open environments. Controlled incineration can reduce the volume of waste, but it also produces emissions. Depending on the technology used, this can include carbon dioxide, particulate matter, and potentially toxic compounds. Open burning, which occurs in some regions due to lack of infrastructure, is even more problematic. It releases a wide range of pollutants directly into the air, including dioxins and other hazardous substances. These emissions can affect local air quality and contribute to broader atmospheric pollution. Even landfills, which are often seen as a more contained solution, are not isolated from the atmosphere. As plastic breaks down, physically and chemically, it can release gases over time. Landfills also generate methane from organic waste, and while plastic itself does not biodegrade in the same way, it can still play a role in the overall emission profile. There's also an indirect but important link between plastic and climate change. Plastic production relies heavily on fossil fuels, and as demand for plastic increases, so does the demand for these resources. This creates a feedback loop. More plastic leads to more fossil fuel extraction, which leads to more greenhouse gas emissions, which contribute to climate change. At the same time, climate change can influence how plastic behaves in the environment. Higher temperatures can accelerate degradation processes. Changes in weather patterns can affect how plastic is transported through air and water. This creates a complex interaction between plastic pollution and atmospheric dynamics. One of the challenges in addressing atmospheric plastic pollution is that it is largely invisible. Unlike a pile of trash or a polluted river, you cannot easily see microplastics in the air. You cannot track their movement with the naked eye. This makes the problem harder to communicate and, in some cases, easier to overlook. But invisibility does not mean insignificance. The fact that plastic can enter the atmosphere and circulate globally changes how we think about its impact. It is not just a local or regional issue, it is part of a planetary system. Addressing this issue requires a broader perspective. Reducing plastic production is one of the most direct ways to limit its atmospheric impact. This includes rethinking the design of products, reducing reliance on single-use plastics, and exploring alternative materials. Improving waste management is equally important. Preventing plastic from entering the environment in the first place reduces the amount available to fragment and become airborne. This involves better collection systems, more effective recycling, and measures to reduce leakage. There's also a need for continued research. Understanding how microplastics behave in the atmosphere, how they interact with other particles, and what their long-term effects are will be critical for developing effective responses. At the individual level, actions may seem small, but they are part of a larger system. Reducing plastic use, choosing products with less packaging, and properly disposing of waste all contribute to reducing the overall load of plastic in the environment. Ultimately, the connection between plastic and the atmosphere challenges a common assumption that waste can be contained. Plastic does not stay where it is placed. It moves through systems, changes form, and interacts with the environment in ways that extend far beyond its original use. The atmosphere is not separate from this process. It is part of it. And as plastic continues to accumulate and fragment, its presence in the air is likely to increase. Understanding this doesn't solve the problem on its own, but it does shift the way we think about plastic, not just as a material we use and discard, but as something that persists, transforms, and continues to affect the world around us, including the air we depend on every day.